Hello and welcome to this very special webinar from the Financial Express. Today, on the eve of the World EV Day, the fourth of its kind, on September 9, we honor the electric vehicle segment, which is considered again as one of the leading contributors to air pollution globally. And today we have with us a different set of industry leaders representing an OEM, a battery company, and a tier one supplier to share their perspective of where do we stand in the global electrification journey, what needs to be done, what has been achieved, and the road forward. Today, we have with us three set of speakers. Mr. Chandrasekhar Krishnamurthy, who is the Global Engineering Director Systems, Software and Engineering Excellence at Borg Warner. We have Mr. Neeraj Rajmohan, CTO and co-founder of Ultraviolet Automotive, a leading electric motorcycle manufacturer based in Bangalore. Rajat Malan, Senior Vice President at Sun Mobility, who represents the battery swapping infrastructure network and one of the first players in the EV battery swapping space in India. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So,
Hello.
coming coming to the questions, Neeraj, you're the youngest of the lot, so I'll start with you. You started your journey and you put your bet or your career. You started your career with the electric vehicle space in the electric motorcycle space, to be specific. So, how have you seen, or how do you see the industry evolving over the years? Given the fact that, when you started, there were hardly any electric motorcycle companies in India or any conversations around that subject.
Thank you, first of all, Nilesh, for having me on the show. I think for us, it's been an interesting journey since 2016 when we started the company, right? While we sort of knew that there aren't too many electric motorcycles, what we were looking at and trying to understand back then was where is the market headed? Because we knew that, there's significant bit of work ahead in terms of building out the technology, building out the capabilities, building out platforms, and building out the eventual end products. So when we started in 2016, I think there were already some clear signs that the entire mobility market is going to go electric. It was no longer a question of is it going to be electric, is it going to be hydrogen based. It was quite apparent at that time, right? This is 2016. Also, there was sort of leading indicators from different other markets in the world, right? If we look at North America with Tesla, the Model S had been introduced. We had started to see some traction around it, started to see how, even though it wasn't the first EV or the first, high performance electric car, it was the first one to make that transition into mainstream, automotive segments, right? So, and then there were, couple of other companies in Southeast Asia which were making this transition. And for us, it was a matter of figuring out which would be the segments where the technology doesn't exist today, but it would need to, right? And that also became sort of the barrier to entry in terms of motorcycles, because it's incredibly hard to build both high performance machines with, sufficient energy density to cover long distances. And I think that's what we've been able to crack over the last 6-7 years, right? And I think it was only a matter of time because we knew that, all of the other segments when it comes to scooters or lower powered vehicles, the challenges had been solved and it had to be solved for high performance motorcycles. And that's why we started.
And Chandra, since you represent a tier one supplier of Warner, and you've seen working with the mechanical to mechatronics and now electrical vehicles. How do you see the role of how do you when you have conversations with your customers, say legacy players and startups, do you see a difference in the way or the aggression that they each of them pose, or what kind of do you see happening over there?
Hello, Nilesh. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on the show. Really a pleasure to be in this panel. It's a very interesting question because we see a lot of evolution happening in the industry today. So first of all, Borg Warner has made a strong commitment towards e-mobility, especially in the last 3 to 4 years. We have ramped up our efforts considerably. We have done this through organic development as well as through M&As. I think Delphi Technologies was one of our largest acquisitions that was done 3 years back. But now with our approach, Borg Warner is a 100-plus-year-old company, and we have been working with all the traditional OEMs all across the globe. But at the same time, for e-mobility, we call it the new age companies. which are totally redefining how a car is thought about and how the car is being defined, how the car is being developed. And especially we see that a lot in China, because that's where most of the new age companies are starting up. US has been catching up in the last couple of years. The style which they work, there is a lot more aggression in the product life cycles. So a traditional car company would expect us a normal development cycle between 2.5 to 3 years, which already is aggressive according to their standards, because that's what we have experienced. But then the new age companies are pretty much like in a 1 to 1.5 year life cycle, and they are coming in with aggressive requirements, and we have to be agile. As an organization, we try to adapt to the different asks that we have in the industry. But not only from the timing standpoint, there is also a lot more that we are learning in terms of how the mindset is changing with respect to the product development cycles, which has been, I would say, questioned, which has been redefined. I think Tesla has been the forerunner with respect to redefining the vehicle, redefining how the vehicle is being built. And that has really opened up a lot more innovation, creativity, at the same time, a totally new mindset to address. And this is where we are adapting. We are pretty much aware of the traditional players who are also evolving. If you look at, for example, a Ford or a GM or a Renault in France, they have completely separated out their ICE business and their e-mobility business. And they want to really kind of bring this whole thought process to be changed ground up from a clean sheet of paper to completely rethinking the vehicle. And they are also managing their workforces accordingly, as they, I think at the end of the day, they have to also compete with these new age players, because again, bringing the example of Tesla, which is totally questioned every paradigm that was established in the market, and now that has completely changed the mindset of the traditional players. And we are closely working with them at the same time, also with the new age players. We are learning a lot more and adapting quickly. And as a supplier, since we have these varied experiences with different OEMs, that really brings the agility that we need to have to really address these different needs.
Quickly bringing you in, Rajat, you were the first battery swapping company in India, and you are one of the largest players in India. One of the key challenges that you're trying to solve is bringing down the cost of the vehicle by offering battery as a service in the 2 and 3 wheeler segment. Again, do you see that for a country like India, battery swapping could very well be used or deployed in higher performance vehicles, say electric motorcycles, passenger cars, commercial vehicles, because that is also something being explored in China also. For example, NIO is talking
Yeah.
about battery swapping. So do you see that that for the near future, battery swapping could act as a accelerator for electrification?
Yes, hi Nilesh, and thanks very much for inviting me at this high-profile panel. So, just to give everyone a context and your viewers a context of what battery swapping is, it's a very simple concept of someone so let me start with 2 and 3 wheelers. So a 2 wheeler customer sort of comes, carries a discharged battery, and he replaces it with a fully charged battery. It's in a matter of a couple of minutes that this process happens, and he's sort of good to go. I'll answer your question in sort of 3 parts, if I may. The bigger Sun Mobility obviously has been doing this for 5+ years. We've learned quite a bit in this journey. The real growth that has happened for Sun Mobility is over the last 12 to 18 months, where we've grown substantially in the 2 and 3 wheeler market, close to 10x. What we've sort of noticed is that the current B2B segment in the Indian market has really taken up to battery swapping. Right? So if you If you look at your food deliveries or you look at your quick deliveries, if you look at your e-commerce players, which require, and that segment per se has grown significantly over the last couple of years. They've taken up really well to sort of battery swapping, and not only battery swapping, they've also sort of taken up to electrification of their fleet. And the primary reason for that is higher range, or unlimited range as we call it in India. And that's a gig worker doesn't really have to stop for a couple of hours to charge their batteries, and this sort of and a battery swap happens in a couple of minutes. He sort of swaps his vehicle and then moves on to an extended hour of working. In his daily job. Apart from that, apart from sort of B2B from a delivery perspective, you also have bike sharing perspective, which is your carrying passengers from point A to point B, and also your last mile deliveries, which is could be through your three-wheeler passenger vehicles and your two-wheelers. That has also taken up really well in the country, primarily because you can start early in the morning, finish when the metro stops, and you don't have to really worry about charging your vehicle in the middle. Now coming on to first of all, I think it's important that we meet the current demand of the two and three-wheeler market in the country, which is massive. And moving on to the four-wheeler market, I think the Indian government is looking at converting all the four-wheeler or passenger segments. 30% of them need to be registered as electric vehicles by 2030. 80% of the two and three-wheelers need to be electric by 2030. That's it's a very good target that the government has set. In fact, a lot of it we feel will be met much earlier. NIO has been very successful in China as far as the four-wheeler segment is concerned. We're obviously looking, as Sun Mobility, we're looking at various options for the four-wheeler segment as well. Those are still in the R&D phase, and hopefully will come up with a much more easier, lighter weight, more automated battery swapping tech to make it much more convenient for a B2C customer or a fleet operator who's doing sort of four-wheelers to make it more successful.
I'll bring all three of you gentlemen to share your perspective. If I look at the examples of EV adoption globally, Norway is one of the leading examples, followed by, say, China. But again, if you look at the subsidy, if you look at the adoption, it was primarily driven by the kind of subsidy or the incentive the government was providing on these vehicles. Again, for India, the per capita income, the affordability factor, the subsidies, we cannot match that of China or Norway. So, what do you think can be done, or or what is the way forward for EV adoption to really take off for a country like India? I will be I would like you to be open about it, not just be specific to your domain, but also in case if you feel like sharing your perspective, what other stakeholders could possibly do, or what each stakeholder needs to do. It would be great to understand, your perspective, since you all are key part of this EV ecosystem.
Nilesh, happy to share my thoughts on this. I think this is a very critical area of thinking itself, because frankly, if EVs have to take over from mainstream ICE vehicles, right, they have to be priced appropriately. This was a fundamental requirement even when we started the company. The good part to this was that if you look at battery prices, overall lithium-ion rechargeable, renewable, rechargeable battery prices in terms of dollar per kilowatt hour, right? In 2010, it used to be about $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Towards 2015, 16, it had come to, $250 per kilowatt hour. And even today, it is, below $200 per kilowatt hour. And that trend continues, though the rate at which, the prices have been improving from an end consumer point of view or from an OEM point of view, it's reduced, but still the benefit of, economies of scale in terms of battery production, manufacturing, availability of raw materials, all of that has actually helped make EVs more available at a price point which is close to that of IC engines, right? So the good part is that the underlying technology, the materials, the processes, all of that have been lining up to make sure that that transition can happen. Now, subsidies are just, in terms of the topping on top of the cake, which makes it even more exciting. And there's obviously a limited level to which subsidies can help out. And in fact, an over dependence on a subsidy also doesn't make sense, right? The technology inherently has to be able to compete head on, right, with IC engines, and that is what has been happening. In fact, the segments that we are going after, I think there is no dependence on a subsidy, right? That's the performance segment of vehicles, and slowly we're starting to see that even in other segments, this is going to be the case. Now, here we're still talking about just the upfront price of purchase of the electric vehicle, right? Which again now can be broken up. One of the models is to separate out the ownership of the battery, right? Which is what I think Sun Mobility is trying to do. The other is to just look at the overall total cost of ownership of the vehicle. With such low energy prices, the cost of electricity being low, even today, if you have paid a premium for your electric vehicle, over a 3 or a 5 year period, you would have recovered or you would have beaten the cost of an ICE with all of the fuel expenses, right? So I'd say that we are already at price parity with ICEs if you look at it from a 3 to 5 year ownership horizon. When it comes to upfront cost, I think there are various ways around it. And I think different companies and different initiatives are going about it, irrespective of what the subsidy has to offer.
Yeah, I'd like to, Neeraj, excellently put. I'd like to add on to what Neeraj just said, right? So I think two phases of EV adoption that have sort of taken place right now in India or are taking place in India. Phase one was just towards whether EV works, how are the customers sort of approaching, or what is the feedback of the customers towards EV in India, which has been crossed, right? I mean, it's fantastic. The number of registrations that have taken place. I think in Delhi, for example, someone was telling me about 70. There was a time when 17% of the total registrations that took place in Delhi were all electric vehicles, right? So the whole initial inertia of acceptance of a customer for EV has been crossed. I think we've crossed that level from an EV perspective, or EV OEM perspective. I think in addition to what Neeraj said, and I didn't want to talk about cost because he's covered it pretty well. What is most critical for us now at this stage, from our perspective, is the infrastructure. I think be it swapping infrastructure or charging infrastructure, that is an area where we would need to focus. If an end consumer sees a swapping station in his area or a charging station, then he would be more keen to pick up an electric vehicle, and that I feel is one barrier which now needs to be addressed. I think the government needs to also be supportive of it. Land banks need to be taken out exclusively for EV players or charging operators or swapping operators like ourselves or OEMs. And I think that is one key area that I think all the players, sort of, including the government and stakeholders, need to work on.
Excellent points from Neeraj and Rajat. So one topic I wanted to cover on top of cost and infrastructure is also looking at the whole well-to-wheel cost, what the government has to spend on. And there is a lot more subsidies that can happen also on the energy generation side of things, because, like, for example, India can leverage solar a lot. Domestic solar can be leveraged to a greater extent, and they're subsidizing solar energy and for domestic use would really bring that whole equation for the total cost of ownership down, as Neeraj rightly mentioned. And with respect to us as suppliers, how we are evolving, cost is a significant factor which we are constantly trying to improve. Today, vehicles are more being driven towards efficiency. So efficiency is a new monetizable attribute in any vehicle, any EV vehicle today. So as suppliers, we are constantly looking into how we can overall improve the system efficiency in the vehicle through our components, through our propulsion systems, plus how we can slowly start bringing the price down. The technology is evolving, and for technology to evolve, there is a lot more to be invested in innovation. and R&D, and that definitely costs money, because at the end of the day, it's resulting to people who really are going to innovate. So we need to improve our workforce, we need to build our workforce, but also get talent, and building all of that talent requires a lot more investment. And I call it investment because these are definitely going to be as returns, because once we have achieved our growth targets, then we can start driving efficiency. And now the last 1 to 2 years have significantly seen a lot more investment into how we can improve the efficiency of developing our products. And cost pressure is already there, because if you look at every OEM, the profit per vehicle, today there are very few OEMs who really make profits on their vehicles, and this is on top of the subsidies that are being given by the government. So as Neeraj rightly mentioned, subsidies can help, but if we don't really work on improving and optimizing the cost of the products, where the technology has to help and has to be utilized, plus also the volumes, that's where the government, I would say, the subsidies are kind of a jump start. But once we have reached the threshold, it should start building up at a steady pace in terms of the market share that EVs can enjoy in the market.
Just building up on your question, let me play the devil's advocate here. There are many critics out there who say that, if you look at efficiency of a well-to-wheel of an IC engine versus what EVs are today, the well-to-wheel for an EV is much more polluting than compared to an ICE engine. What would you like to respond to that, or do you also agree to that notion?
So in terms of polluting, I think it's a very broad statement that is being made. And if you can split the phases of how energy is being created and utilized and recycled, I would rather say first you have the energy creation phase, then the energy utility happens on the vehicle, and then you have and then the battery packs, for example, here are into the recycling phase. I would leave the recycling phase for a moment, because EVs are like 2-3 years old. Batteries are given a guarantee of at least 10 years, and then they can be recycled before the materials can be extracted. So we are a little bit far away from there. So that's why I leave the recycling phase out. But then when you take the energy generation phase, a lot of energy is being generated out of coal, right? And that is the huge argument going on, that EVs also requires a lot of coal to be burned. But today, for extracting fuel, we are no way different to how coal is being utilized for energy generation. So it's pretty much considered a parity from my standpoint. But then the whole utility part, that's where the tailpipe emissions are absolutely zero. And that is unbeatable with respect to ICEs. ICEs have tailpipe emissions. There is considerable pollution numbers that has been constantly published. Multiple cities have already banned ICEs from the downtown area just because of the pollution they cause. So the whole tailpipe emissions is a big win. So if I split this into 3 parts, we are already winning big time on the tailpipe emission side. And on the generation side, that's where more renewable sources of energy can be more promoted, and that goes back to my comment on solar. So that's kind of my perspective on if EVs are polluting. I would definitely say no, they're not.
So Nilesh, I'd like to just add to this point here. I think there's a sort of misconception that EVs, if they are powered by coal, end up polluting more than ICs. If you do the actual math, right, and this math is quite easily, it can be done, because if you see India as a whole, right, a lot of the energy that we get in our electricity grid comes from coal-powered thermal power plants, right? If you see on an overall basis, you get about 800 grams of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour of energy that is coming through our grid, right? Now, if you start to translate that into how many grams of CO2 are produced at a vehicle level per kilometer covered, right? And if you start to compare that to the number of grams of CO2 produced from petrol by burning 1 liter of petrol, and the number of kilometers as a consequence of covering it on petrol, you'll notice that even if today's situation where a lot of our electricity grid is powered by coal, despite that, an EV is way more efficient than an IC vehicle in terms of just pure number of grams or number of kilograms of CO2 put out on a per kilometer basis. There is absolutely no debating that, because the numbers are available and easy to calculate. In fact, we have done this calculation on multiple occasions because it is important to us to understand how many grams of CO2 have been saved over the lifetime of a vehicle. And our every single customer of ours, as they ride their vehicle in their app screen today, are able to see that just by riding 100 kilometers, how many kilograms of CO2 I've saved because I've not used petrol. And we are considering the emissions from the grid as well, right? So this math actually works out. So you can call it well to wheel, emissions. You can call it, of course, all of this further improves if solar is there in the picture, if renewable energy sources come into the picture, that any emissions that exist on the grid side also start to go away, right? But it's already quite efficient, if you ask me.
Yeah, so Nilesh, just a couple more points on this, right? So completely agree. I mean, there's no doubt that this electric vehicles is absolutely zero tailpipe emissions, and it's way better than ICE. I mean, there's no argument on that. It is. I mean, I'm currently in a city which is dealing with pollution. I mean, which is Delhi, a city which is was termed at some point in time as the most polluted city in the world, or one of the most polluted cities in the world, and we know that. And most of the pollution used to come from vehicles, right, during winter time, and that's the reason why the state government, the central government, is sort of putting so much money and so many subsidies into sort of electrifying the fleet or electrifying the vehicles, giving so many subsidies, giving so many SOPs to make it more electric, to make it more sort of environmentally friendly. What the government, I mean, something about solar, right? And so, generation of electricity, solar power or wind power coming into the grid. What the government also, I think, is probably working on is an option for the end consumer to choose which electricity that they want, right? So if there is coal power coming in, there's also a substantial amount of renewable energy coming in. So I think I don't know numbers off my head, but I think the last time I saw it was about 22% of the total electricity generated in India comes from renewable energy, which is sort of nuclear, solar, wind, hydro, all that put together. Currently, if I need to choose, or an EV operator needs to choose, or energy generator needs to choose, or an energy consumer needs to choose that I only want green power, that is not allowed because it's all mixed in the system. But I can generate electricity either through a rooftop solar or through off-grid, and then wheel it back to our to the generation point or to the dispensing point. But that has limitations on a 1 megawatt basis. So if I need to have a minimum load of a 1 megawatt meter in my swapping station, for me to sort of wheel in power into my swapping station. So that obviously will change going forward, and then we'll make it completely green, as you want to call it. But even now, the amount of energy emissions that we save, as Neeraj put out, I think we're way better, and it's only advantageous to sort of adopt electric vehicles in the city and in the country.
So now coming to clean mobility, let me go to a bigger and a broader picture. We'll move from say from electric vehicles to clean vehicles, because right now the lines are being blurred. And what do you define a clean vehicle? People talk about alternate energy mix. Hydrogen is being spoken about, sodium ion is being spoken about, solid state batteries are being spoken about, and God knows how many new chemistries are being explored and discovered. From a consumer perspective, he is often confused, because every now and then, someone comes up and says, "Hey, this is my technology. This is the best technology." For you guys, it is about like, putting your bets on one particular technology over the other, like, putting your focus on one. You can't, because you can't keep all your, like, you can't be investing in each and every technology. So how challenging it is, and how, like, what kind of dominance do you see for each segment? Rajat, I'd like to start with you because, like, you represent, your business piece is much more, could be much more impacted if, say, like, that the technology goes from one particular chemistry to another. So how do you put, like, how do you de-risk yourself, or where do you see the future?
Thanks, Nate. So obviously a good question, and I think Sun Mobility and our whole concept of basically focusing on technology obviously is increasing the density of the battery, so the capacity of the battery needs to go up, whereas the consumer doesn't need to face a problem, or the efficiency of the battery and the energy of the battery needs to go up, where the consumer doesn't have to face a problem of changing the entire system in the vehicle. So that's point number one. I think we've done that. I mean, there are three different types of batteries that we've introduced with higher capacity, whereas the vehicle doesn't need to change. So all the consumer needs to do is basically change one battery to the other, and he gets a higher capacity battery. We focused on it. Apart from that, I think our key focus has always been on safety and security of the battery. That has always been the focus of Sun Mobility. We do not want to get into a problem and testing you. Obviously there has been continuous R&D in the batteries, but our focus has been safety, and that is what the government's focus is, and that is what the industry focus is to make sure that safety and security of the battery is met, and the consumer's confidence in Sun Mobility only increases. Now, if you are talking about making it a level playing, I mean, making it a standard field for all, I think as far as battery safety is concerned, I 100% agree it should be standard. But if you are going to tamper with one battery overall, I don't think that works. You are going to, as Chandra mentioned earlier in the conversation, there has to be continuous innovation in the battery. How do you know whether this is the right battery? You will only come to know. I mean, like Tesla, the charging infrastructure in the US only after 5-6 years, then they decided that this is going to be a standard infrastructure. There has to be time which is to be given to all battery swapping players on what is the best battery to sort of go in for. Which there needs to be, we are too early in the phase right now, Nilesh, to understand which battery to go with. Overall. So it is important for all companies to get a headway, runway into, and the consumers to understand which is the best battery to go for, and then try and talk about standardization. This is not the right time. We don't even know which battery there is that we will go in for standardization. So that's our perspective. But our focus has always been in increasing the density of the battery, the same battery pack, so that the customers don't suffer. And obviously safety and security of the battery when it comes to thermal management, torsion management, and BMS.
Neeraj, getting you on board over here, because you're like, for you also different chemistries could mean different things. So, like, in the electric motorcycle space, you've put your bet on a particular chemistry. But what about alternate chemistries or alternate batteries? What do you think could be the future?
Right. So I think the way to see this is actually to zoom out a little bit, and look at, the technology maturity as a spectrum in terms of different technologies, right? If you look at today's lithium-ion batteries, your typical NMC, NCM chemistries, even your LFPs, it all started in about 1990, right? 1990 was when Sony introduced the first lithium-ion chemistry, the first cylindrical cell format. And since then, it took about a decade for it to start appearing, in consumer electronics devices, right? That is all the way up to 2000. And from 2000 to 2010, you'd see the widespread usage in consumer electronics. And after that point, 2010 onwards, you start to see its appearance in electric vehicles, right? So between 1990 and 2010 was the time it took for the technology, the chemistry, the mass productionization to get to a point where it could be commercially used in electric vehicles, right? And it's taken another 10 years for it to now make itself into mainstream EV sort of technologies. So this is the maturity cycle for lithium and batteries. typically any new chemistry that you take, even when we see a lot of these announcements in newspapers and in research studies saying that a new chemistry has come about at a lab stage, while it makes a lot of sense and that's where the innovations are happening, right? To get it to a commercial stage where it is economically viable at scale, and can be validated and used in an electric vehicle, I think it's almost like 6 to 10 years of work that really happens at the very minimum, from my point of view, what I'm seeing, right? Even the innovations that we see today in today's batteries in terms of improvements in energy density were actually disclosed as research improvements, almost a decade back, right? So this is how it is, when it comes to lithium ion batteries, any other variants of the chemistries. When there are new chemistries, of course, like I said, it's going to be at least a 6 to 10 year cycle. And if there are completely different non-electrolyte based chemistries, right? We talk about solid state batteries. Till today, there's not been a commercial production vehicle or even a few prototypes that have been actively running and covering hundreds and thousands of kilometers, right? It is very much at a lab stage. So I'd say while we all prepare and make our plans, it takes a while for the technology to mature, and that's how we build confidence that this is not drastically changing anytime soon. We know that, and then when it comes to other forms of energy, right, energy storage in terms of hydrogen or fuel cells, again there are limitations and benefits to each of those. They make a lot of sense in some other particular markets or long distance transportation, commercial transport, but may not necessarily make sense in consumer vehicles, consumer owned vehicles, right? Because of the inherent benefits that the grid today brings, which is the electricity is already available to your last mile, right? If a hydrogen network has to be made available, you have to recreate the entire availability of hydrogen and last mile availability of hydrogen. So all of these different factors start to play, a key role in deciding which ones are we going to adopt and which one is going to make sense for our product, right? And that's how I think we've built our comfort around it.
Question for you, Chandra, since you are a global player and you have manufacturing site spread across the globe. One of the key things that I've noticed, if a case in point about the US new EV, the new the EV policy that I may say, there's a lot of focus by each government to bring in localization and manufacturing of key components. So do you think this creates a win-win situation for the adoption of electric vehicles in the country, as everyone has to manufacturing it locally and thus bring down the cost? Or does it create an uneven field? Because for say a country like China, India, US, the domestic market is huge. But if you look at the export opportunities, China presents a different case, India presents a different case. And again, that the subsidy or the support that the government is giving gets lost. So, from a tier one supplier perspective, what are your views on this kind of policies that are being introduced now?
I think one of the key drivers behind driving these new policies first to have local manufacturing to really drive that manufacturing base, which creates jobs and therefore contributes back to the government. I think that's more the general perception. The other one is about the supply chain challenges that we have seen. So, like when COVID hit, the whole world came to a stop, and the whole supply chain came to a stop, and we all had our own share of challenges to really meet our commitments with our customers, as our customers also had their commitments to meet to the end customers on the road. So everybody started thinking about alternatives on how to address this, because such a situation was not imagined before. And now that situation can very well be the norm every now and then, depending on how germs spread in the future. So I don't want to speculate on that, but the supply chain challenges was one of the major considerations for the governments to really drive their policies in a way that they could drive local manufacturing, but also find alternatives to having all of electronics manufacturing based out of one country or a couple of countries, which can come to a total stop during situations like this. So that's how we see it. But nevertheless, BorgWarner as a company, we have a broad production manufacturing footprint across all the regions. if you look at our company, our footprint is like pretty much equally divided among all the three regions. If you look at around close to 100 locations, we are like almost 30-ish in almost each of the locations, each of the regions, like Americas, Europe, and Asia. So we have this distributed network there to really tap into the local manufacturing policies as well, but at the same time ensuring that we have a robust supply chain for our customers.
Right. So, quickly, if I have, I think we are almost at the last leg of our conversations. I would like to request you to keep your answers crisp and quick, because this, I would, like to know from each of you your top three expectations from the Indian EV market. Starting with you, Rajat, followed by Chandra, and then I'll give you the last word, Neeraj, for this question.
So, what? So the top three expectations from the EV market would be, I think, the growth in the EV sector, I feel, is going to be primarily driven by the 2 and 3 wheeler market in India. I think the government policies are now more focused on the safety of EVs, which has already happened. I think there is going to be more structured approach when it comes to that, and there's going to be the third one is that the drive from the government is also going to be more on subsidies as well. So this is not going to stop; it's only going to grow better. I think the government's aim of electrifying the country by 2030, or majority of the fleet vehicles by 2030 is going to be achieved, and there's going to be definitely a much faster adoption going ahead. So if we've grown by 200%, I think that growth is going to continue for the time to come.
All right. So as a supplier, I always would put growth in the market as the first expectation. As really looking forward to the India EV market growing. Looking at numbers, I think there's been some. I would classify that as exponential increase in the number of vehicles being sold in the last 3 years, and they should continue to really catch up. So that's number one. Number two is with respect to component sourcing and with respect to semiconductors, right? That's a huge opportunity for India to capitalize on today, especially when alternatives are being sought to especially on the semiconductor side of things. So that's something which the government should constantly push for and try to capitalize this current situation where we can have a huge base for semiconductor manufacturing. And third is faster adoption from the public and drive that faster adoption through a stronger infrastructure and also educate the public more on the total cost of ownership, which could really spur the growth in India.
Yeah, I'd say, some similar points there. I'm very excited about the growth of EVs. I think we're starting to see that over the last year or so. So that is one major factor in which I'm generally talking about, the acceptance of EVs, the realization that, this is now an inevitable transition from ICE to EV. I think that is one big factor that is, I'm excited about. The second is, the push towards building, robust supply chains, right? Whether it is from the battery cells point of view, whether it is from the electronics industry, you're seeing investments in semiconductor manufacturing, right? And this is in general exciting because I think the global supply chain needs some of this as well, right? To de-risk some of these things, right? If cells are available from India, if semiconductor microcontrollers are available locally as well, it starts to make India a very, very powerful, manufacturing center, right? And the third thing that I'm actually looking forward to, and I'm hoping that there is more effort put in, is from the infrastructure and charging point of view, right? Which is the availability of quick, energy replenishment, whether it's highways, whether it's cities, and a sort of push from the government side also to make it happen through, keeping interoperable standards, these kinds of things, which I'm also seeing a lot of activity around, and I see that, that's another factor.
Thank you, Neeraj, Rajat, and Chandra for sharing your thoughts. I think it was indeed a very elaborative conversation around the present, the past, and the future. We covered a huge range of topics, right from battery chemistries to what the expectations are, and good to see that we are all ending on a very optimistic and a singular note about the potential of India in the global supply chain, as well as the potential adoption that you for all three of you gentlemen foresee in the coming future. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our audience. Look forward to having you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.